good. Thanks again. Outstanding. And welcome to the Elizabethtown Church of the Brethren. We are a church that practices peace, service, and openness to all, and we welcome you all here this morning. We'd like to recognize first the Dietrich family, Matt, Ben, Noni. This is always a special experience for us. These Matt and Ben are world-class touring musicians, and it's hard to get everybody together all at the same time, but when you're here, it's amazing, and we like to have you do all the music. So thank you guys for being with us this morning. My name is Pastor Josh. Pastors Pam and Greg are on vacation. Pastor Jason is here. And ordained pastor, Reverend. Naomi will be bringing the message this morning. So, do you have any announcements for us?
Yes, I do have a couple of announcements before we talk about the worship theme for today. First, it did not make it into the bulletin, but I was asked to remind everyone that the Lunch Bunch group will be going to Harvey's today. Not Hardee's, which is what I thought I heard.
No, Harvey's.
And I was like, yeah, are there Hardee's? So also the A&E Women's Fellowship is happening at Camp Swatara. That's August 18 to the 20th. And you can sign up on the bulletin board, or you can talk to Pat Leiter if you want more information about the A&E Women's Fellowship that happens every year at camp. Two more announcements. One, perhaps you saw it as you were driving in. There's a big sign out there announcing our VBS that's going to be happening almost a month from today. And that happens because we're able to utilize the wonderful volunteers of this congregation. So if you are interested in contributing in any kind of way, please feel free to talk to me. There's also a sign-up that's out in the Narthex area by the bulletin board. If that's an area where you feel like you'd love to help, feel free to sign up. If you have any questions about getting clearances or anything like that, feel free to talk to me. I'd love to walk you through that process. It's very easy, but we'd love to have help for VBS, and we need everyone's help to make it happen. And the last thing is tonight from 5 to 7, junior high and senior high youth are invited to my house. We're going to be grilling and playing some yard games, so it should be a lot of fun. I think that's it.
Yeah, so our worship theme this week is the plumb line, not the plum, the fruit, which you probably can't get at Hardee's or Harvey's, but plumb meaning aligned. So we're going to take a look at Amos, who we might not have spent a whole lot of time with before now, and find out what that plumb line might look like. So welcome to worship.
All right, we invite you to stand for our opening hymn.
Let me be your servant. Let me be as Christ to you. Pray that I may have the grace to let you be my servant too. We are pilgrims on a journey. We are travelers on the road. We are here to walk a mile and bear the load. Now will you let me, will you let me, will you let me be your servant? Will you let me, will you let me, will you let me be your servant too? I will weep for you in the nighttime of your fear. I will hold my hand out to you, speak the peace you long to hear. I will weep when you are weeping, when you laugh, I'll laugh with you. I will share your joy and sorrow till we've seen this journey through. Will you let me, will you let me, will you let me be your servant? Will you let me, will you let me, will you let me be your servant too? When we sing to God in heaven, we shall find such harmony. Born of all we've known together, of Christ's love and agony. Will you let me be your servant? Let me be as Christ to you. Pray that I may have the grace to let me be my servant too. Now will you let me, will you let me, will you let me be your servant? Will you let me, will you let me, will you let me be your servant too?
God in the Bible and by seeing the actions of other Christians around him. In reference to the song, he said that the song kind of percolated and ruminated in him for about a year, with actually one of the verses left written just on a piece of scrap paper that he had sitting in his guitar case. So the song eventually became the song that it is today and known all around the world. And it shows that often in our busy and overscheduled lives, as we lift ourselves towards God and we work to serve each other, God can do wonders with those extra scraps we have lying around. Please pray with me. To you, God, we lift our souls. You are our God, and we trust in you. Look upon us with mercy and love, the same steadfast mercy and love you have shown throughout history. Make your ways known to us. Guide us into your truth. Show us the way we should go. For you are our God of salvation, full of compassion and steadfast love, and those who wait on you will never be put to shame. Amen.
Good morning. How are you all today? Good. I think this is the first time I've done children's time in this church. This is pretty exciting. I'm glad you're all here. I have a question for you, And some of this might require you to think back to school, and I'm really sorry about that because I know it's the middle of July. But what kind of things, I'll show you this in just a second, what kind of things could you use if your teacher told you, or if at home you needed to make a line that had no squiggles, no bends, completely straight and even? Well, tape, good one. Ruler. Did you ever use like an edge of a book? What's that? A wire. That's a really great idea. What if you needed to make a line like on a wall? Not that you should ever do that. But if you needed to for some reason, particularly if you were making a line like this way. Have you ever heard of a tool called a level? Yeah, it's got like a little bubble inside, and you have to look very carefully to see if it's exactly in the right spot. And when it is, you know you have a line going directly across this way. What if you need to make a line this way? Or what if you don't even need to make a line, but you need to match something like let's say up on the ceiling with the exact same spot down here on the floor? You may not have ever had to do that. Can you think of anybody who would have to do that? Maybe your parents, yeah? What would they be doing, or what would someone be doing that might require that type of a line? What's that? Clark. Not sure what you mean. What if you were building something like a wall or a house? So I brought this along, and this is my husband's, Mariah's dad. I've not seen him use it, but I trust that since we have it in our house, he must use it a lot. So you hold the string, and why don't you go ahead and just touch the bottom part there? What do you notice? Go ahead and lift it. You can put it with your whole hand. What do you notice about it? It's heavy. Yeah. What do you think it's made out of? Do you want to feel it? Yeah, it's made out of metal. I'm not sure how much this one weighs, but it always surprises me. It feels heavier than it looks, doesn't it? Yeah. So if you're holding this, or you attach it to something, and you let it rest, it takes a minute. You notice it was kind of spinning when I held it up there? If you let it hang for a minute, yeah, it will give you an exact straight line from the top of the string to the bottom. It's called plumb. I said that word at the beginning, a plumb line. You might have heard of a plum like a fruit, a little purple fruit, like a nectarine kind of fruit. So this plum is spelled differently. This has a silent B at the end, like your thumb. So it's like a thumb plum. Yeah. Okay, so I found that funny. But anyway, so that gives you a really straight line. And there are times that you need to do this. So I put a message out on Facebook, and I asked if any of the people that I know on Facebook had one I could borrow. I knew I had this one, but I wanted to see if there were any others. And I got a message back from the Garmins. And if you look up here on the red curtain, if you can't see it, you can stand up. Do you see there's something hanging up there? Yeah. Is that a little bigger than the one that I have in my hand? Can you guess how much do you think that one might weigh? Not quite 20 pounds. Good guess. 14 pounds. So that is a plumb line, a plumb bob. The bob is what we call this bottom part, that was used at Bethel Steel. Mr. Garmin brought that in to share, and he hung it up there for us so we could kind of see it during our sermon today. Is it giving a pretty straight line from top to bottom? Yeah. And so it will point to exactly the way that it needs to connect on the floor to the thing that's up at the top. So that's a pretty important tool if you're building construction. What happens if you build a wall that is not straight up and down? What if it's like this? It could fall, yeah. Particularly if you need to put something else on top of it, like another floor or another piece of wall has to connect to it. That could be really dangerous, couldn't it? Do you think we can always trust our eyes to tell when a wall is straight up and down? Yeah, like if you're building with Legos, you might think, but what if you're on a floor that's not very even, or you're on a carpet, it might fall down, it might crumble. So we can think it looks straight with our eyes, but we really have to have something like a plumb bob that can help us test. And that's what that's what our scripture from Amos is going to be about today. How to know when we have found a plumb line that is perfect. Let's say a prayer together, and then you can listen for the sermon and hear a little bit more about that. God, help us make good choices, even when it's hard. Give us courage, bravery, and strong voices to help change the world. Amen. Thank you.
This is the time in our service where we offer the opportunity for individuals to come forward and share some prayer requests or concerns that we might have. So please feel free to come forward, and we'll give you the microphone to do so. think there will also be some music that will be shared as a prayer response of music.
Good morning, brothers and sisters. I'm Nancy Hivner. By virtue of being your church board chair, I'm also one of the delegates to annual conference representing this congregation. I am 1 week into my recovery from the conference. My fellow delegates were Pam Rice and Karen Wenger, and I suggest that you draw no conclusions at all from the fact that within days of returning from conference, they both left the country. I also realize I am standing between you and more music by the Dietrichs, and so I will try very hard to be brief and be gone. A few facts about annual conference. We were 3 of 677 delegates at the 233rd annual conference. Annual conference exists to unite, strengthen, and equip the Church of the Brethren to follow Jesus. There were 1,458 non-delegates registered, and there's a quaint, charming custom that anybody who is attending conference for the first time, be he or she a delegate or a non-delegate, you get a pink sticker on your name tag to designate that you're a first-time attendee. My very most favorite first-time attendee who had his very own name tag complete with pink sticker was Oliver Haldeman. So if you want Oliver's perspective on annual conference, track him down. He might be more interesting than I am. A typical day in the life of a delegate would not be uncommon for a delegate to be out the door of his or her hotel room at 7:15 in the morning and not return till 10 o'clock at night. That's because during those hours, for instance, at this conference, we heard 9 reports from the Brethren Benefit Trust, the Pastor and Compensation Benefits Committee, the Program and Arrangements Committee, the Ecumenical Reports, the Report of the Church of the Brethren, the Bethanary Seminary, and On Earth Peace. The agencies and the organizations who prepare these reports work hard to do so, and they provide useful and informative information to the delegates. We also participated in elections. We elected a moderator, a Program and Arrangements Committee member, a Mission and Ministry Board member for areas 4 and 5, the Bethany Seminary Board of Trustee person, a member of the Church of the Brethren Benefit Trust Board, and a member of the On Earth Peace Board. The 2 candidates from this congregation who were on that ballot, Joe Dietrich for moderator and Kurt DeGood as a member of the seminary board, were unfortunately not elected despite stellar qualifications. We spent 2.5 to 3 hours per day in worship and or devotions. And I can tell you that it was wonderful. There is nothing like several thousand brethren singing a hymn. The preachers were well prepared, organized, the content was strong and meaningful, the music was well presented. But my editorial comment is that I would happily prefer on any given Sunday to be here, listening to the concise, well-organized, well-researched, well-delivered sermons and the music prepared by our choirs and our ensembles led by Josh and Elizabeth. They are second to none, and I feel fortunate to be back home. We also have our opportunity for what's called insight sessions, during which we learn many things. We as delegates decided we would split up so we could learn lots of things. I went to a workshop on how to make sure your church board is functioning effectively. I went to a workshop on a new approach that's being considered to pastors' compensation. Karen attended at least one workshop on Brethren Disaster Relief, and Pastor Pam went to one on deacon ministry. They went to more, but because they're out of the country, I couldn't cycle back and figure out what else they went to, so I could tell you. You'll have to ask them. There are banquets, there are reunion luncheons, there are exhibits to visit. It can be a very, very stimulating experience. This year, the delegates spent most of their time working on the compelling vision. Now, this is a process that's been underway in excess of a year. The delegates last year voted by a wide margin to say, you know, all we do is argue about recommendations and statements and polity provisions and all of that, and we keep churning. We've been churning for 20 years. Let's try something different. Let's create a vision for our future. And so the delegates last year said, yes, suspend all business for 2019 and let's get about this vision for the future. And that was part of the work that was done in individual districts in the last 12 months, where the vision team came out and held meetings and asked people for input. And at this annual conference, we spent hours and hours and hours responding to questions asked by that team. Questions like, when you dream of the church in 10 years, what do you hope the manner of our living conveys at that time? What do our practices convey about our priorities and passions as Christ's disciples? What foundations are central to forming a Christ-centered community? What biblical passages undergird these foundations? On matters where there are deep differences around biblical interpretation, how are we to move forward to live in peace as the body of Christ and strengthen the mission of Christ in the world? We had 19 questions like that we wrestled with around our tables over the course of 2.5 days. It was for hours and hours. We had iPads. Thankfully, the denomination invested in some technology, and so as ideas were developed around the tables, we were to type them in one at a time and submit them. The process team was at a little corner in the meeting room watching these responses come in. In the first minute after the first question, they had 850 responses. That group has a lot of work to do in the next year to compile this data, to work through it, and the plan is for them to prepare a compelling vision for the denomination's future to be presented at next year's annual conference. I've had a lot of people ask me, well, what was it like, Nancy? How was it? How did it go? It was evident that the planners and the denominational leaders spent a lot of time encouraging a tone of conciliation, cooperation, peacemaking, servanthood. We were referred to page 77. We have a book about this thick as a delegate. Page 77 reminds delegates how to behave. And it's very good information. It strikes me, though, as being rather sad, isn't it? In a gathering of our own delegates of our own denomination to do the work of the church, we have to have a page in there, and we were referred to it repeatedly to remind us how to behave when we talk to each other. But nonetheless, that happened. Anybody's immediate sense of how it went would come from their table mates. I had 7 table mates. You're seated at round tables. Non-delegates were invited to do so this year also, so that they could engage in these conversations. There were 7 others at my table. 5 of them were pastors, all men, and there were 2 women. All were less progressive than I, and represented congregations less progressive than this one, some significantly so. And I must confess there were moments when I felt like a kitten in a dog pound or a puppy in the cat shelter, because you're surrounded by people that seem like they're completely different, saying things that aren't things you usually hear. But nonetheless, the 8 of us around that table were focused on the answer to these questions. And they were well conceived, in my view, and they were designed to help us understand what common threads there are among all the members and congregations in the Church of the Brethren that might enable us to find common ground to move forward. As I said, the team will be analyzing those responses and bringing a report back next year. I believe that the denomination has a window of opportunity right now, to be disciplined about following through on the compelling vision process, to do all we can to support it, and to support the outcome of it as the views and the dreams and the hopes and the understandings of nearly 700 delegates from congregations all across the country are consolidated into something to help us move forward. It's going to be hard. I mean, I believe that vision is going to equip us to focus on ministry instead of polity. Wouldn't it be nice to get to the point where we do that? Where we don't have people using polity statements from 30 years ago to make a club to pound people who have a different understanding of how we are to be in ministry or what the scriptures say to us. I hope we can get there, but it's going to be hard. I don't know how optimistic to be. I struggle with that. I'd like to think that we can do it. It's a challenge for our denominational leaders, it's a challenge for delegates, it's a challenge for congregations to try to find a way forward that doesn't include all of the rancor. I'd like to tell you that we're done and here's how wonderful it all is, but I can't say that. I do think we have a worthy process in place, and I'm hopeful that whoever reports on next year's conference is able to say, look what happened. Look what happened. On the first, well, I can tell you one point of great unity in the hall was when Chris Douglas, who is she is a gift to our denomination. She coordinates annual conference. She makes announcements regularly about administrative things that are happening and that needs to change. She organizes all of these vast events in cooperation with the leadership team. She stood up on Thursday, I guess, and said, oh, guess what? The people in Grand Rapids are so glad that we are coming next year that they called me and they want to send $2,500 to us for ice cream. The delegates immediately cheered. And so whoever's going to Grand Rapids next year should have a good time, and everybody this year had a good time. But on the first night, we heard a sermon from Danita Keister, our moderator for this year. And one of the things she said is, she was very candid about the need to do the work we have to do to try to find a way forward, to try to sort through our differences lovingly. And she said, it's important because we need to know where we stand. People need to know where they stand so they can plan and find a way to move. And I decided it would be good for me to personalize that a little bit. I should think a little bit about where I stand. And I can tell you I stand here as a person trying to live a faithful life. And my desire is that my faith informs my priorities, my decisions, my behavior, my values. And I have so much to learn and such a long way to go to be mature in that process. One thing that sustains me thoroughly is that I stand with all of you. And that is quite meaningful to me. I hope that is meaningful to you, that standing together as we, as a progressive congregation, work together to practice peace, service, and openness to all. We are changing lives, I believe. My life is changing because I know you all. And it's changing, I think, for the better. I don't know what you observe. And I believe it's imperative that we stick together and that we do stand together. I appreciate that you are standing with me and that we do stand together, and it has been an honor to represent you at this year's annual conference. Thank you.
This is what he showed me. The Lord stood by a straight wall with a plumb line in his hand. The Lord said to me, Amos, what do you see? I said, a plumb line.
Then an expert on the law stood up to test Jesus, saying, Teacher, what must I do to get life forever? Jesus said, What is written in the law? What do you read there? The man answered, Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind. Also, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Jesus said to him, Your answer is right. Do this, and you will live. But the man, wanting to show the importance of his question, said to Jesus, And who is my neighbor? Jesus answered, As the man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, some robbers attacked him. They tore off his clothes, beat him, and left him lying there, almost dead.
Then the Lord said, See, I will put a plumb line among my people Israel to show how crooked they are. I will not look the other way any longer. The places where Isaac's descendants worship will be destroyed. Israel's holy places will be turned into ruins, and I will attack King Jeroboam's family with the sword.
It happened that a priest was going down the road. When he saw the man, he walked by on the other side.
Amaziah, a priest at Bethel, sent this message to Jeroboam, king of Israel. Amos is making evil plans against you with the people of Israel. He has been speaking so much that this land can't hold all his words. This is what Amos has said. Jeroboam will die by the sword, and the people of Israel will be taken as captives out of their own country. Then Amaziah said to Amos, Seer, go back right now to Judah. Do your prophesying and earn your living there, but don't prophesy anymore here at Bethel. This is the king's holy place, and it is the nation's temple.
Next, a Levite came there, and after he went over and looked at the man, he walked by on the other side of the road.
Then Amos answered Amaziah, I do not make my living as a prophet, nor am I a member of a group of prophets. I make my living as a shepherd, and I take care of sycamore trees. But the Lord took me away from tending the flock, and said to me, Go, prophesy to my people Israel.
Then a Samaritan traveling down the road came to where the hurt man was. When he saw the man, he felt very sorry for him. The Samaritan went to him, poured olive oil and wine on his wounds, and bandaged them. Then he put the hurt man on his own donkey and took him to an inn where he cared for him.
Amos continued speaking to Amaziah, saying, So listen to the Lord's word. You tell me, don't prophesy against Israel, and stop prophesying against the descendants of Isaac. Because you have said this, the Lord says, your wife will become a prostitute in the city, and your sons and daughters will be killed with swords. Other people will measure your land and divide it among themselves, and you will die in a foreign country. The people of Israel will definitely be taken from their own land as captives.
The next day, the Samaritan brought out 2 coins, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, Take care of this man. If you spend more money on him, I will pay it back to you when I come again. Then Jesus said, Which one of these 3 men do you think was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by the robbers? The expert on the law answered, The one who showed him mercy. Jesus said to him, Then go and do what he did.
This is what he showed me. The Lord stood by a straight wall with a plumb line in his hand. The Lord said to me, Amos, what do you see? I said, a plumb line.
It's always dangerous to start with a quiz, but do you know where in the Bible Amos is located? I think it's fair to say that Amos is sort of hard to find. It's not a long book, only 9 chapters. We don't hear a lot about it, and I will admit that I flipped past it quickly the first time that I was looking. It's easy to do. I'm actually going to invite you to take out either your own Bible or the Bible in front of you in the pew. This isn't a race. It's red. The Bible is red, not to be confused with the sign-in tabs on the end of the pews. And we're going to go old school. I don't have the scriptures on the screen. I'd like to find them in the Bible. It's towards the end of the Old Testament, among several other pretty short books, other prophets. If you can find Ezekiel and then Daniel, which both have a little bulk to them, it's just a couple past that, right behind Joel. Or you can just turn to page 962. As you might gather from my sermon title and our children's time discussion, this imagery of the plumb line really hung with me. No pun intended. Okay, that was totally a pun intended, and it was really bad. But the Hebrew word here for plumb line, anak, and plumb, twice in the first verse of Amos 7, appears nowhere else in Scripture. In fact, plumb line may not even be the best translation for this word. It is similar to an Assyrian word meaning something like tin, so it could refer to kind of a hunk of metal. But the visual of a measure for straightness still seems to apply, so we're going to go with the language plumb line. As biblical books go, this one is pretty old. Amos was a prophet likely during the 8th century BCE, so early to mid-700s before year 0. What is a prophet anyway? I think we often think of someone who tells the future. But perhaps more accurately, a prophet is one who tells what they see, the true reality of things. And part of that is being truthful about where things are headed. The prophets in the Bible are sort of the eyes and voice of God, the conduit through which God's message gets to the people. And as you might imagine, that message is not always welcomed with open arms. There are two parts of this Amos text for today. The first, shorter part, verses 7 through 9, is a vision that Amos describes of the Lord standing by a perfectly straight wall and holding the plumb line out for Amos to see. Then God indicates that God will set this plumb line in the midst of Israel, quickly determining that Israel is indeed not plumb and in need of some serious realignment, as in total destruction. God will not only take down the places of worship that the people have developed, but will also take out the king, Jeroboam, and send the entire population into exile. The second part of the text for today, verses 10 through 17, is an interesting exchange between Amaziah and Amos. Amaziah, priest of Bethel, and probably collaborator with the king of Israel, Jeroboam. Religion and politics were tied pretty close together. Certainly, we can all think of other examples of that scenario in the last 27 or so centuries. So Amaziah feels it is his duty to let Jeroboam know that Amos is suggesting the downfall of the king, thereby manipulating Amos's prophecy into an act of treason. Then Amaziah turns to Amos and tells him to get the heck out of town. No more prophesying in these parts. But Amos, firm in his understanding of God's message and committed to his responsibility to convey that message, says, "No, I'm not even really a prophet. I'm a herdsman and I trim sycamore trees, but the Lord pulled me out of that and told me this is what I am to do." His call is clear. Amos is not doing this out of his own desire to be a prophet. He is not doing this because he wants to. He's not doing this because he's been trained or taught or shown, but he responds nonetheless, even when it is unpopular, even when he's being told to skedaddle because his message is confrontational. I can't say I blame Amaziah, really. Being told the king is going down and the rest of Israel, including me, is probably going down with him. I mean, what would that have meant for Amaziah? It was probably part of his job description to keep the king in the loop about characters like Amos. Besides, the economy is booming. Business is good. Why fix it if it ain't broke? Not only does Amos suggest that things aren't going to go well for the king, Amos has some pretty strong words to say about what is going to happen to Israel's people and Israel's land. Destruction, death, exile. Amaziah is really just trying to hold on to what he knows, what is comfortable, which, to be quite frank, may be a fairly normal tendency for most of us. But I keep going back to the image of the plumb line. What exactly is the plumb line? What is the measurement that God is using here that has sent Israel so much out of whack? What have the Israelites done that is so wrong? We have to go back further in Amos a bit to get a sense of that. Repeatedly, we see words that make it clear Israel has not treated the poor and needy with the care God requires. Chapter 4, verse 1, hear this word, you who oppress the poor, who crush the needy. Amos is highly critical of those who are taking it easy, the wealthy, and those who have set up systems that maintain their own power and security. He does not have good news for them. Chapter 6, verse 4, alas for those who lie on beds of ivory and lounge on their couches. Those will be the first to be exiled, Amos declares. Amos is standing in solidarity with the poor, with the oppressed, with those on the outskirts of society, with God. Amos several times gives instructions that the people need to seek the Lord, repent, draw near to God, reconnect. And through this, they have the opportunity to establish practices of justice and live righteously, but they have not shown that they can do so. Instead, the people are using festivals, offerings, songs for show, instead of truly seeking God and living in harmony with God's ways toward others. Some of the most familiar verses from Amos tie these two ideas together. Chapter 5, 23 and 24. God says, take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps, but let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Warnings have been given. God has already tried to point Israel in a different direction through various means, including disease in crops and gardens, locusts. In chapter 4, verse 6, cleanness of teeth, which does not in fact mean a threat of dental care, but means teeth that are clean because they have not been dirtied with food. Lack of bread, famine. God has sent drought and death, fire, lots of fire. But the Israelites haven't gotten the message. By the time we get to today's focus, chapter 7, it gets a little uneasy. Amos's reflection is of God who has lost patience. Verse 8, I will never again pass them by. Other translations read, I will not look the other way any longer, or I've spared them for the last time. This is it. There is no more time. There are no more chances. God is done. Judgment is now. This is not a challenging and then comforting kind of prophecy. This is not a gentle scolding with more or even equal emphasis on the forgiving, gracious nature of God here in this part of Amos. No, Amos says that God's finished making deals, finished giving warnings. Israel has had its chance time and time again, and indeed, destruction is what happens over the course of the following years of Israel's history. They are conquered and taken over. The people are exiled and then eventually return back home as strangers in their own land. Like a wall that is out of plumb, Amos says Israel must be broken down before it can be rebuilt. A wall that is even slightly out of place cannot support that which depends on it above and from the sides. The weight of the entire structure rests on the confidence that all is plumb. But what if it's not? This should not have been news for Israel. From the get-go, God made it clear that earthly kings were not God's design. All the way back in 1 Samuel, we hear the people calling for power in a way that the other nations have, a human king to help them fit in. And even though God says this is really not a good idea, the people demand it anyway, and Saul emerges as the first king. And I invite you back to 1 Samuel sometime to read about how that turned out. Years and years and years of continually building a structure that is out of plumb leads to the structure no longer being habitable, no longer sound, no longer acceptable. Continual mistreatment of the poor and needy, the powerless and the downtrodden. Perhaps this leads to Israel finding itself beaten and left along the side of the road. I want to be careful as I intertwine Old Testament and New Testament. I want to be careful about the theological implication that the Old Testament is old news, old laws, and all was put aright with the New Covenant in the New Testament. To do so, in some ways, devalues the truth of the stories as we find them here in the First Testament. The judgment of God, as described in Amos and other texts, does not necessarily need a later text to fill it out, bring it to completion. God is the same God. However, at the same time, we do find our hope, our ultimate hope, in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And it is this hope that enables us to truly live in new and full ways. So it's tricky. There's a rub. But I will say it this way. I think the Luke 10 text of the Good Samaritan story and Jesus' words give us a beautiful illustration of the plumb line. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Do this and you will live. Which I would be remiss from mentioning is almost exactly quoted by Jesus from Deuteronomy and Leviticus in the First Testament. Do this and you will live. You will be plumb. Love God and love thy neighbor. As on the words of popular t-shirts and bumper stickers and social media memes, thy black neighbor, thy brown neighbor, thy gay neighbor, thy imprisoned neighbor, thy Muslim neighbor, thy sick neighbor, thy poor neighbor, thy racist neighbor, thy addicted neighbor, thy homeless neighbor, thy beaten and left by the side of the road neighbor. Where are you, where are we out of plumb? This is a question not only of our personal habits and individual actions, but Amos is talking even more pointedly about structural sin, social injustice, massive problems that feel like there is no solution other than to wipe the slate clean. How have we contributed to the continuous building of a structure that is out of plumb? And equally important, what do we do now? I think sometimes we have a positive view of the word justice and a less positive view of the word judgment. And for me, at least, I think that is heavily due in part to my privilege, my station in life. When I hear judgment, I immediately think I'm going to lose something. Something is going to be taken away, probably unfairly, but maybe connected to something I've maybe done to deserve it. And certainly the judgment that Amos is describing for Israel does not have a positive outcome for Israel. Yet the flip side of God's judgment in Amos for the poor and needy in this story, what healing, what salvation, what freedom it would hold. God is saying through Amos that God is going to turn the world upside down, taking down Israel and its power and position because Israel did not care for the least, the bottom. That judgment would sure sound hopeful to those at the bottom. It's as upside down as a Samaritan helping out a beaten Jewish man along the road from Jerusalem to Jericho, two men who at any other time would have regarded one another as enemies, strangers. We have an understanding that's a little upside down of God's kingdom. Not only are the individuals acting in unexpected and challenging ways, but the entire societal nature is being rocked. I had the privilege on Wednesday to join the small group that is meeting every other week to read together and discuss Don Crable's Upside Down Kingdom. Conversation was good, the snacks were really good, but the opportunity to meet together as an intimate group of less than a dozen was wonderful. Not only did we have the pleasure of getting to know one another personally, but we took the time to wrestle with some really difficult ideas, including, I would suggest, although we did not use these words explicitly, how to live out the plumb line. One of the ideas we discussed was that this commitment we make to one another, to God, to justice, to love, this isn't a once and done thing. This is a continual, repetitive choice, decision, and in good times and in bad sort of activity. This is a covenant we make with God and with one another to live in a community that prioritizes those whom the world does not prioritize, that places power in a different source outside of ourselves, that bends a knee instead of raising a fist, that chooses to live in community, even when everything outside these walls seems to scream, every person for themselves. The other group in which I participated recently was at annual conference. You heard a little bit about it already. I sat at a non-delegate table, and we were committed as non-delegates to continuing discussions throughout the week about developing this compelling vision. It is challenging when you sit around a table of 8 persons and don't necessarily feel like you have a strong compatriot there in the group. Thankfully, I did have others in my group who I felt that I could resonate with. There were over 100 tables of discussion groups, and these ideas were input onto the iPad, as was already described, and I was the designated note taker for my table, and I can say that it was exhausting to listen carefully to what each person had to say about each question, attempt to accurately capture their idea in probably fewer words than they used to talk about it out loud, typing onto this flat screen keyboard that didn't always respond the way I was telling it to, and then submit it quickly before the next person began to speak. Meanwhile, at the receiving end were all these submissions coming. They described it like a fire hose, and they were receiving them all at once. And somehow, in the span of the 15 minutes we were talking, they developed a very brief summary of what we had just done to share with the entire group before we moved on to the next question. Sometimes they gave general ideas of what we talked about, and sometimes they gave specific quotes. And I don't remember which question it was, but one specific quote stood out to me. As we considered what the church should be moving forward, one table suggested the church should be worthy of persecution. Persecution, according to a quick dictionary definition, to harass or punish in a manner designed to injure, grieve, or afflict, to cause to suffer because of belief. Persecution, in this suggestion, means that the church is choosing to behave in a way that is so out of alignment with society's values and expected behavior that it is treated as odd, weird, even angering those outside. I'm thinking that's what Amos was talking about. I'm thinking that's what God was looking for Israel to be doing, treating the poor and persons who have been cast aside with such love and care that society says questioningly, with a raised eyebrow, "What the heck are you doing?" I'm thinking that's what Jesus says when the lawyer asks who his neighbor is. The person you would least expect, the person you find little commonality with, the person with whom you do not agree. That is who we are commanded to love. One other thing I noticed as I was playing around with the plum this week, I watched several YouTube videos about how to use a plum properly, and I noticed that they all either attached the plum to a nail or looped it over the top of a board, some kind of sturdy object to gain stability. If I stand here holding the bob just with my hand, it will never slightly stop moving. By the very nature of my humanity, my breath, my trembles, my muscle twitch, I can never actually create a true plumb line. It would require using some type of stable object. But I noticed in verse 7 that Amos sees God holding the plumb line in God's hand. And I think that's significant. Only through the power of God can true plum actually be created. We cannot create or live out the plumb line on our own. It is God's faithfulness to us and our faith in and dependence on God that enables us to rebuild our walls when they have been destroyed by our own human interests. It is our willingness to allow God's power working through us that enables us to love our neighbor, to show mercy. Do this, and you will live. I send you with words attributed to Teresa of Avila. Christ has no body but yours, no hands, no feet on earth but yours. Yours are the eyes with which he looks compassion on this world. Yours are the feet with which he walks to do good. Yours are the hands with which he blesses all the world. Yours are the hands. Yours are the feet. Yours are the eyes. You are the body. May it be so.